They called her just a nurse. 3 words Dr. Sterling had spoken loud enough for the entire nursing station to hear. Just a nurse. As if her hands hadn't once held the carotid artery of a dying man while helicopter rotors hammered the air 3 feet overhead. As if her name tattooed on a Delta Force colonel's forearm didn't mean something nobody here could possibly understand. But that was Houston. That was Mercy General. That was the careful invisibility Rachel Torres had purchased with 12 years of silence. She arrived at 0600 hours like she always did, moving through the pre-dawn corridors with the kind of efficiency that made her disappear into the walls. Temporary staff. The red letters on her ID badge were meant to mark her as disposable, and Rachel had learned long ago that invisibility was a gift. The hospital smelled like it always did, antiseptic layered over something ancient and organic, the smell of bodies fighting to stay alive. She didn't flinch at it anymore. She'd smelled worse. She'd been covered in worse. Her locker was in the basement, 3rd row from the left, number 247. She knew every locker in this corridor by number and location the way she used to know every room in FOB Shank by exit and cover position. Her hands moved with muscle memory as she traded her street clothes for scrubs the color of rain. Cotton blend, nylon pocket with a hole in the seam she'd never bothered to report. She pulled on the compression socks, adjusted the stethoscope around her neck, an instrument she'd bought used for $47 that hung like a millstone some days, and then she reached for the lower shelf. The boots were there. Always there. Worn combat leather, desert tan faded to the color of old bone, scuffs that marked every extraction, every sprint through fire, every moment she'd spent running toward the sound of gunfire instead of away from it. Dried mud still caught in the treads from Tikrit. She didn't know why she kept them. Didn't know why she couldn't throw them away. Her fingers traced the edge of the left boot, the one with the permanent crease from where a bullet had grazed the heel in 2009. She took one measured breath. Pressed her forehead against the cold metal of the locker door. Then she locked the boots away and closed her eyes. When she opened them, Rachel Torres was nobody again. Just another temp. The morning rounds at Mercy General moved like clockwork. She began with the supply carts on the 3rd floor, restocking the trauma bays with methodical precision. Airway equipment. Facets. Medication drawers organized by drug class and expiration date. Her hands moved with such practiced efficiency that the other nurses had stopped asking her how she'd learned to work so fast. Speed was invisibility. Speed meant she wasn't noticed. Speed meant she wasn't asked questions about where she'd worked before, why she never talked about her background, why her references were all listed as confidential, military service. By 0800 hours she was in the records room, pulling charts for the morning admissions. That was the work nobody wanted. Chart review. Coding verification. Insurance cross-checks. It was tedious work that required precise attention and left no room for error. Rachel was very good at work with no room for error. She'd been trained for work with no room for error. One mistake in a field hospital meant someone didn't make it to the extraction point. One mistake on a chart meant someone got billed twice for the same procedure. She was reading through admission paperwork when she saw them. Duplicate charges. The name was Jonathan Marcus, age 47, admitted 3 weeks ago for an appendectomy. Simple procedure. 7-day recovery. The bill should have been straightforward. Instead, Rachel found 17 separate line items for consulting services billed to an entity called Sterling Medical Solutions LLC. 17. Each one dated and signed by Dr. Henry Sterling, Chief of Surgical Services. She ran her finger down the list. $7,000 per consultation. 17 times 7,000. She did the math in her head. $119,000. For consultations on a routine appendectomy. Rachel's hands didn't tremble. Not in public. Never in public. But her jaw clenched just enough that the muscle in her temple tightened, and she had to set the chart down before she moved to the next file. This one was different. Trauma case from 6 months ago. A car accident victim. The billing codes didn't match the discharge summary. The pharmacy log showed no record of 3 of the medications listed on the final bill. The anesthesia report was missing entirely, but the charge for anesthesia services was there, $4,000 for a procedure that should have required $400. She was so focused on the third chart that she almost didn't notice the footsteps. Working hard or hardly working, temporary. Dr. Sterling's voice came from behind her like oil spreading across water. Rachel didn't look up. She'd learned that looking up gave people power. She simply closed the chart she was holding and set it on the pile with the others. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft. Deferential. The voice of someone who knew her place. Just finishing the morning intake reviews, Dr. Sterling. Should have these processed within the hour. He was standing in the doorway now, and she could see his reflection in the polished surface of the metal chart rack. Expensive watch. Custom scrubs with his initials embroidered on the chest. The kind of presence that made people unconsciously move away, the way water parts around a ship's bow. 30 seconds passed. 45. Rachel kept her eyes down and maintained her composure, waiting for him to leave. Instead, he crossed the room and looked over her shoulder at the charts she'd been reviewing. Find anything interesting? His voice had changed. The casual cruelty had evaporated, replaced by something colder. Something that moved like a predator's focus, shifting from disinterest to full attention. Rachel's throat tightened, but she didn't let it show in her face. Routine audits. Insurance verification. Nothing unusual. That was a lie. She was very good at lies. She'd been trained to lie. To move through spaces where the wrong word meant the wrong people died. She carefully gathered the charts and slid them into the proper folders, each movement precise and deliberate, the way someone moves in a minefield. Dr. Sterling watched her without speaking. The silence stretched. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects trapped in plastic. Then he smiled, a thin thing that never reached his eyes. See that you keep it that way, he said. We don't need any temporary staff getting confused about hospital billing procedures. He left without waiting for a response. The rest of the morning unfolded like every other morning. Rachel worked the med-surg floor, changed dressings, ran labs, managed vitals for post-operative patients who barely registered her presence. Invisibility worked both ways. People didn't see you when you didn't want to be seen. They forgot you'd been in the room. They forgot you'd heard conversations you weren't supposed to hear. By 13:30 hours, she was in the break room microwaving a meal prep container of chicken and rice when the overhead intercom activated. Trauma alert. Incoming by helicopter. Trauma alert. 2 minutes. The break room entered in seconds. Rachel left her meal in the microwave and moved toward the stairwell, not because she was assigned to the trauma bay, but because 12 years of muscle memory responded to that call the way her heart responded to blood pumping through her veins. Some things didn't fade. The rotor wash shook the windows as the UH-60 Black Hawk descended toward the landing pad. She could hear it from the stairwell, feel it in her chest, the percussion of blades pushing air like a metronome counting down to something. The medical team was already moving, assembling on the helipad with the choreographed precision of people who'd done this 1,000 times. Rachel stayed back, in the observation corridor, watching as the stretcher descended. The patient was covered in blood. The front of his uniform was soaked through. His head was wrapped in medical tape. 2 units of whole blood were already running through both arms. The voice of the flight medic crackled through the radio. Male, early 50s, sustained trauma to right thoracic cavity from IED blast. Traumatic brain injury, severe. Unconscious since evacuation. Vital signs marginal. We've got 2 units running, bilateral chest tubes. He came from Tikrit. Delta Force. He coded once en route, we shocked him back. Rachel's breath caught. Just for a moment. Just enough that she had to grip the doorframe to steady herself. Tikrit. She would know that name anywhere. She would know it in her sleep. She would know it for the rest of her life. The stretcher moved past her, and she caught a glimpse of the patient's face. Weathered. Strong. A face she'd last seen when it was screaming orders through the chaos of extraction fire. A face that belonged to someone she'd last seen being loaded onto a medevac bird while rounds were still hitting the metal skin of the aircraft. Colonel Marcus Chen. Delta Force. The man who'd called her the best officer under my command right before she'd carried him through 3 blocks of urban fire to the extraction point. She followed at a distance, maintaining her invisibility as the trauma team moved him into Bay 4. The clinical part of her mind was already running through his vitals. Blood pressure 82/56. Heart rate 138. Respiration labored. The man was holding on by a thread. 2 units of blood wouldn't be enough. They'd need more. They'd need surgery. They'd need someone who could keep him alive long enough for his body to decide whether it was going to fight. Dr. Sterling was already there, talking on his phone, his voice low and professional in that way that made people trust him without question. Rachel hung back at the nurse's station, pretending to review charts while she listened. He was discussing consultation fees. He was discussing an exclusive surgical contract. He was discussing billing codes for procedures that hadn't happened yet. She saw it then, the moment his eyes met hers across the trauma bay. He was looking at her, really looking, and his expression shifted. Not to recognition. Not yet. But to something else. To the sudden understanding that this woman standing at the edge of his controlled space was not just another temporary nurse. That the way she was watching the colonel with that particular intensity, not concern, not panic, but absolute tactical focus, meant something he couldn't immediately quantify but could absolutely measure as a threat. Her gaze didn't waver. She held his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked down at the chart in her hands and made herself disappear. The medical team moved the colonel from the stretcher to the hospital bed with the kind of careful precision that meant they understood he was barely holding together. As they transferred him, his right forearm was exposed. The tattoo was there. Small. Faded. Just 4 letters and a number in military grading that had been applied by someone with a needle and steady hands in a forward operating base that no longer existed. RT 0-4. Rachel Torres. Senior Chief Petty Officer. Call sign 04. He was unconscious. His body was barely holding on. His memory was fractured from the blast that had torn through his chest and thrown him against a concrete wall in a city that had never been his to understand. He wouldn't recognize her if she stood 3 inches from his face and whispered her own name. But his forearm knew. The skin over his heart knew. Some part of him remembered, even if his conscious mind had been rebuilt by trauma. Rachel turned away. Walked back to the stairwell. And in the privacy of the empty landing, she allowed herself exactly 45 seconds of something that looked like shaking but felt like rage held in a clenched fist. The stairwell door closed behind her with a soft hiss of pneumatic pressure. Rachel stood on the landing, hands gripping the cold metal railing, and allowed the rage to move through her like current through copper wire. 45 seconds. That was the protocol she'd set for herself years ago, in Tikrit, in the desert, in rooms where control meant the difference between extraction and body bag. 45 seconds of shaking. Then nothing. Then forward. She counted it down. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. By 35, her breathing had stabilized. By 45, her hands lay flat against her thighs, steady as surgical steel. The next morning, Dr. Sterling found her at the nurse's station while she was updating the colonel's vital signs into the system. His footsteps announced him before his voice did, expensive leather shoes on tile, the kind of entrance designed to turn heads. He stopped directly in her line of sight, close enough that she smelled the cologne underneath the antiseptic, something that cost more than her weekly rent. "Rachel, is it?" His tone was casual, the way a man speaks to someone he's already decided about. The attending physicians within earshot stopped charting. "How long have you been a nurse, sweetheart? 6 months? A year?" She didn't look up from the monitor. "Finish the last number." Saved the entry. Then she turned to face him, and her voice came out the color of iron. 3 years, Dr. Sterling. One tear escaped before she could stop it, rolling down her left cheek like a single rebellion. She didn't blink. Didn't acknowledge it. Let him see exactly what she was choosing to give him, which was nothing but her eyes, and those didn't flinch. Then perhaps you can explain why you're questioning my treatment protocols on the Colonel's case. He held up a piece of paper, her notes, the one she'd transcribed about the duplicate billing entries. The one she'd carefully documented while processing intake paperwork. Asking very specific questions about charging codes. Very specific indeed. Rachel's jaw tightened. Just a fraction. Just enough that only someone trained to read microfractures of movement would notice. I was simply. Simply what? Playing doctor. His smile had teeth in it. The attending physicians nearby shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. One of them, Dr. Kapoor, good doctor, 15 years at Mercy General, looked away entirely, suddenly fascinated by his own clipboard. I give you credit, though. The audacity. Walking around like you belong here. Like you understand what happens in this hospital. He turned away, satisfied with the silence he'd created. Rachel went back to her charting. Her hands didn't shake. Not where anyone could see. The cafeteria at 1,430 hours was packed, the shift change between day and evening rotations, nursing students, residents, the full machinery of a level 1 trauma center at lunch. Rachel sat at a corner table with her tray, turkey sandwich, apple, a small cup of soup that steamed in a fluorescent light. She was eating mechanically, not really tasting it, when she felt the shift in the room's atmosphere. It was like watching a predator move through tall grass. Not sudden. Worse than sudden. Deliberate. Dr. Sterling approached her table with a resident following behind him like a moon orbiting a planet, and he was talking loudly, animated, gesturing broadly about the afternoon's surgical schedule. His elbow came up as he laughed at something he'd said. Absolutely ridiculous, the way insurance handles. His arm caught her tray at the perfect angle. Deliberate. Calculated. Soup exploded across the table, across her scrubs, silverware clattering against tile with a sound like broken promises. The room went dead silent. Oh, I'm so sorry, Dr. Sterling said, his voice dripping with theatrical concern while his eyes stayed cold as hospital bathwater. He gestured at the mess. How clumsy of me. Then he picked up a patient chart from the adjacent table and dropped it at her feet, a calculated fall that suggested carelessness. Since you're down there anyway, Rachel, pick that up, sweetheart. There's a good nurse. The words were honey-coated poison. Everyone heard them. Everyone saw him smile. Rachel knelt slowly, wiping the soup from her scrubs with the back of her hand. The chart lay on the floor like a gauntlet. She picked it up, straightened, and her eyes met his without breaking contact. When she spoke, her voice was the sound of something ancient and controlled finally deciding to speak. I've been covered in better men's blood. The cafeteria froze. A resident's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. A nursing student's jaw went slack. Dr. Sterling's smile tightened at the corners, and for just a moment, one single moment, something flickered across his face. Not anger. Worse. Recognition. He'd expected tears or apologies or the collapse of a person he'd successfully humiliated. He'd gotten the opposite. Excuse me. His voice had sharpened now, the honey burned away. Rachel was already walking toward the trash receptacle with the ruined meal. Nothing, Dr. Sterling. Thank you for lunch. She left the cafeteria without looking back, but she could feel the aftermath in the room the way you can feel the pressure change before a storm, heavy, electric, dangerous. The afternoon rounds were different. Colder. Dr. Sterling moved through the ICU with his entourage, and when he reached the colonel's room, he paused long enough to announce a new policy to everyone within earshot. His voice carried the kind of authority that came from knowing nobody would challenge him. Effective immediately, he said, looking directly at Rachel as she adjusted the colonel's oxygen saturation monitor. All temporary staff will have their charting reviewed by attending physicians before filing. Quality control. I'm sure our temp nurse Rachel understands. He smiled. Or should I say, our temp nurse who thinks 3 years makes her an expert. The resident shifted. Rachel checked the cardiac monitor, sinus rhythm, regular, strong. For now. I give her a week before she quits, Dr. Sterling continued, addressing the room like she wasn't in it. Anyone want to take that bet? 3 residents laughed nervously, the kind of laughter that comes when you're not sure if it's safe. Rachel didn't acknowledge any of it. She was focused on the colonel's vitals, and what she was seeing wasn't good. Blood pressure dropping in the last 4 hours, hadn't been this low during morning rounds. Cardiac rhythm still regular, but the rate was elevating, compensating for something. Breath sounds diminishing on the left side. Subtle. But real. That evening, while the hospital's night shift began their preparations and the fluorescent lights hummed their endless hospital song, Rachel pulled the colonel's complete file. She'd memorized the protocol. She was authorized to review billing information as part of care coordination. Authorized. Right. She photographed 3 pages with her personal phone, hands moving with the precision of someone who'd handled classified documents in worse conditions than an empty chart room. The first page showed consulting fees. $47,000 to Sterling Medical Solutions, a company she'd seen mentioned 3 times in 3 different patients' charts during her intake reviews. Phantom specialists. Procedures listed that were never performed. She'd seen this in Tikrit, seen bureaucracy weaponized, seen numbers that didn't match reality. But not like this. Not in a civilian hospital. Not with this much money. Her hands were trembling when she finished photographing. Not visible trembling. Not public trembling. Just the kind that happens when your body recognizes a threat your mind is still processing. She was back in the colonel's room by 1800 hours, checking vitals again. His blood pressure had dropped further, now 94/58. The cardiac effusion she suspected was building, the way fluid accumulates around the heart when something's going catastrophically wrong. His breathing had become labored, each breath costing him something she could see in the tightness around his mouth. She paged Dr. Sterling. No response. Paged him again at 18:15. Still nothing. The colonel's right forearm was bandaged from shrapnel wounds, old ones, field-dressed and then properly treated, but still bearing the marks of trauma. When she adjusted his for line, the edge of the bandage shifted slightly, and she saw the beginning of a tattoo underneath. Letters. 2 letters. Ra. Rachel. That's what she saw. That's what her brain registered before her hands jerked the bandage back into place with more force than necessary. The colonel's eyes didn't open. He was still sedated, still in that suspended state between life and the mechanisms keeping him there. But his forearm had just confirmed something she'd suspected since she saw his face during intake. This was the extraction. This was the colonel she'd carried through Tikrit streets 3 years ago, back when she was still the person the tattoo was asking for. She gripped the bed rail. Counted backward from 10. Found the composure that had gotten her through worse situations with higher stakes. That was when she heard the footsteps. Multiple footsteps. The kind of approach that meant official business. Dr. Sterling arrived with Administrator Patricia Chen and 2 security officers, the kind of security that doesn't wear uniforms but carries themselves like they know how to end conversations. The kind that gets called when someone needs to be removed from the premises without drama. Rachel Torres, Patricia Chen began, and Rachel recognized the tone of someone reading from a script they'd been handed. We've received complaints about your conduct. Specifically, harassment of attending physicians and unauthorized access to patient financial records. In the corridor behind them, Rachel caught a glimpse of movement. A small figure in a backpack, homework in hand. Marcus. Her son. 12 years old, waiting for his mother's shift to end like he did every Tuesday and Thursday. waiting and now seeing security officers and hospital administration standing in a cluster outside a patient room where his mother worked. Rachel took one measured breath. No tears this time. That was yesterday's allowance. I accessed records I'm authorized to see as part of patient care coordination, she said. Her voice was steady. Different from the voice she'd used in the cafeteria. This was the voice of someone who'd already calculated the outcome and found it acceptable. The intake protocols require review of billing codes for proper chart documentation. Dr. Sterling's smile widened. Patricia, can you confirm that temporary staff have financial record access? The administrator shook her head slowly. No. That access is attending level only. Then perhaps Rachel can explain why she was photographing patient billing files with her personal phone last evening. He produced a security camera image, grainy but clear enough. Her hands holding her phone. Her face visible. Everything deniable and everything damning. The Colonel's room has cameras, Rachel. All of our ICU rooms do. The air pressure in the hallway changed. Rachel felt it like the moment before lightning strikes. I'm placing you on administrative leave pending investigation, Patricia Chen said, and now she sounded like she meant it, sorry, but official, the way hospitals sound when they're protecting themselves. Effective immediately. Badge and key card, please. Rachel removed her ID from her scrubs. Her hands trembled as she did it, and this time she let them, because she wanted them to see that she was human enough to understand what was happening. The badge felt heavier than it should have, like she was placing a piece of herself into someone else's custody. When she looked up, Marcus was standing at the corridor's far end. His backpack had slipped off one shoulder. His homework was forgotten on a waiting room chair. His eyes were watching his mother the way people watch accidents, unable to look away, unable to comprehend the transition from normal to catastrophe. Rachel met his gaze for 1 second. Then she handed over her key card, and a security officer gestured toward the elevator. That evening, Dr. Sterling made 3 phone calls from his office while his computer hummed with the ambient noise of a hospital that never truly closed. First call, to the temp agency. His voice was pleasant but contained an edge like broken glass coated in honey. He thanked them for Rachel's service, expressed concern about her professional reliability, and made it clear that her presence in Houston medical facilities going forward would result in the loss of Mercy General's contract, a loss that would cost them approximately $800,000 annually. The temp agency listened. The temp agency understood. Second call, to board member Richard Kozlowski. Casual. Golf outing reminder. One more thing, Richard, we've had to deal with a problematic nurse situation. Unauthorized access to financial records, falsified charting, the works. She's already been terminated pending investigation, but I wanted to give the board a heads up before the state board review becomes official. Might be good to discuss at the next meeting. You know how these things can reflect on hospital governance. Third call, to the state nursing board. Dr. Sterling had prepared this one with particular care. The complaint was detailed. Rachel had administered morphine without proper documentation, had accessed patient records outside her authorization, had made medical recommendations beyond her scope of practice. He provided falsified medication logs showing inconsistencies in her charting. He attached copies of the security footage. He did everything carefully, everything with paper trails, everything that would hold up under scrutiny because it was designed to. He hung up the phone and sat in the darkness of his office, listening to the ventilation system's endless breathing, and calculated how long it would take for the state board to move, how much additional time he had before any real investigation began, how many procedures he could still bill before everything became impossible. What he didn't calculate was that in the ICU, the Colonel's condition was deteriorating rapidly, that within 5 hours the cardiac effusion would compress his heart until it stopped pumping, that 12 doctors, the entire surgical staff on rotation, would refuse to treat him after Dr. Sterling declared the case non-viable, and that a temp nurse sitting in her kitchen 3 miles away, crying in front of her confused son, would be the only person willing to go back. Rachel's apartment was dark at 0530 when she pulled on the same scrubs she'd worn for 3 years, the ones that fit her like a second skin. The administrative leave letter sat on the kitchen table, signature line still damp. Her son slept upstairs, unaware that his mother was moving through the pre-dawn Houston streets like a ghost returning to a place that had already buried her. The traffic lights blinked red, yellow, green in the empty city. Mercy General was a silhouette against the dawn sky, all concrete and glass and the muted roar of an fax system that never stopped breathing. The loading dock entrance was where orderlies wheeled pharmaceutical deliveries and blood work samples. Rachel had memorized this route weeks ago, a muscle memory, the way soldiers memorized patrol patterns. She wore street clothes, a dark jacket over her scrubs, and carried a borrowed ID badge clipped to her waistband. Marcus from transport had given it to her without asking questions. He'd seen her hands work. That was enough. The service corridors ran parallel to the main hallways, an arterial system that hospital staff used to move unseen. The air here smelled different, antiseptic cut with something metallic, like copper left on a hot radiator. Rachel moved through shadows cast by industrial lighting, her footsteps absorbed by rubber-matted floors. No one looked at her. No one ever did. The invisible woman passing through the invisible corridors. The ICU monitors could be heard before the rooms came into view, a steady percussion of beeping, the whoosh of ventilators cycling air in and out like mechanical lungs. Rachel stood in the observation window for exactly 4 seconds before she understood what was happening. The colonel's oxygen saturation was 87. His blood pressure had dropped to 102/58. The telemetry showed a heart rate elevated to 141, and his breathing was shallow, rapid, the breathing of a man whose circulation was failing. Muffled heart sounds. Distended neck veins visible even from the window. Pulses paradoxus, the blood pressure dropping with each breath. The signs were screaming. Cardiac tamponade. The pericardium was filling with fluid, compressing the heart, crushing it from the outside. She moved into the ICU corridor just as Dr. Raymond Walsh emerged from the colonel's room, his expression shifted into something sharp and urgent. Walsh was a cardiothoracic surgeon who'd trained at Walter Reed and still carried himself like a man accustomed to life-and-death decisions. He'd already assessed the colonel. He knew. Pericardiocentesis. Stat, Rachel said. Walsh's head turned. His eyes registered her presence, the temp nurse who'd been terminated yesterday, now standing in the ICU in street clothes and a borrowed badge. His face moved through confusion and then resolved into something close to professional acknowledgement. I was about to call the attending. This patient needs. The doors to the ICU opened like the mouth of something swallowing. Dr. Sterling entered with 11 other physicians trailing behind him. The entire surgical staff on rotation. Cardiologists, thoracic surgeons, trauma specialists, intensivists. 12 doctors whose white coats seemed to fill the corridor with the weight of institutional authority. Sterling's expression was composed, almost serene, the face of a man who'd already calculated the odds and found them acceptable. Dr. Walsh, Sterling said, his voice carrying the temperature of a walk-in freezer. Step away from that room. The patient is in acute distress, Walsh replied. Cardiac tamponade. He needs immediate intervention. Sterling moved past him without changing pace, a motion like a shark cutting through water. I'm declaring this case medically non-viable. The patient's injury pattern, the extent of the trauma, the 17 days of complications, the survival probability even with emergency pericardiocentesis is less than 10%. The liability exposure to this institution is catastrophic. I'm writing a note in the chart right now, surgical intervention is medically contraindicated. Any physician who proceeds will face board review for reckless endangerment. The words were chosen with surgical precision. Not a suggestion. Not a recommendation. A declaration. A threat wrapped in medical language, designed to make resistance feel like insubordination. Walsh's jaw clenched. He's a decorated officer. He deserves realistic. He deserves realistic medical assessment, Sterling interrupted. Which is what I'm providing. He pulled the chart from the wall rack and began writing, his pen moving with the confidence of someone whose authority had never been questioned. "Dr. Henderson, Dr. Kim, Dr. Okafor, all of you. I need your signatures as concurrent attending review. This patient receives comfort care only." One by one, they signed. 12 physicians, each one closing their charts and stepping away from the ICU. Henderson, Kim, Okafor, Martinez, Patel, Schwartz, O'Brien, Nakamura, Al-Rashid, Cohen, Levi. The names hung in Rachel's mind like a list of the dead. They weren't refusing because they agreed with Sterling. They were refusing because they were afraid of him. Because they understood that in a hospital hierarchy, a single physician with board connections and a willingness to destroy careers was more dangerous than any diagnosis. Rachel stood perfectly still. Her hands hung at her sides, unshaking. Her breathing remained steady. The composure of someone who'd held wounded men in her arms while rounds cracked the air above them. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She watched. Sterling turned to the nursing staff. "All personnel reassign away from room for 12. Effective immediately. I'm posting a no treatment directive. Only attending physicians may enter. Security will be stationed at the door." He made 2 phone calls in sequence, his voice clipped and efficient. First to the charge nurse, then to hospital security. "Post someone outside room for 12. Nobody enters without my direct authorization." Within 10 minutes, the colonel's room had been cordoned off. A security guard, a man named Tilson who Rachel recognized from the ER loading dock, stood in the corridor with his arms crossed and instructions that were simple and final. The colonel's oxygen saturation continued to fall. 85%. The monitor beeped with increasing frequency, each pulse a countdown Rachel could hear from where she stood in a supply closet 3 rooms away, the door cracked open a single inch, watching. Dr. Sterling made a final call from the hallway, stepping into an empty stairwell where the acoustics were just clear enough for Rachel to hear from her position. The voice on the other end came through as a crackling murmur, but Sterling's words were distinct. "The military case will resolve itself by morning," he said. "Natural causes. Very tragic. Arrange the comfort care transfer for 0600. The family can pick the funeral home." The call ended. Sterling walked past the stairwell entrance, his expression unchanged, his pace unhurried. A man whose strategic moves had just transformed the colonel's room into a holding chamber. A place where medicine would not arrive. Where help had been officially forbidden. Rachel waited in the supply closet for 4 minutes after Sterling disappeared into the main corridor. Around her, the shelves held gauze packets, saline bags, trauma shears with their familiar weight. She pulled on gloves with a sound like fabric tearing. Her borrowed badge hung at her waist. The colonel's oxygen saturation was now 82%, dropping in real time toward the threshold where decompensation became irreversible. She opened the supply closet door and stepped into the ICU corridor. Tilson, the security guard, looked up from his phone. "You need to leave," he said. "I'm picking up supplies for the trauma bay," Rachel replied, her voice flat and administrative. "No one's authorized to enter room for 12. I'm not going into 412. She kept moving, neither hurrying nor hesitating. The pace of someone who had every right to be there. Tilson's hand remained at his side. He'd been given instructions not to let anyone in. She was coming out. 2 different scenarios. The colonel's monitor could be heard now from the hall. The beeping had accelerated into a rapid staccato rhythm. The sound of a heart being crushed. Rachel moved with the precision of 17 years of practice, the muscle memory that lived in her shoulders and hands independent of her thoughts. She knew what needed to happen. She knew what had to happen. The question was only whether she had time. At 20:47 hours, the colonel's heart began to fail. At 0200 hours, the monitors began their death song. The cardiac rhythm strip flatlined for 3.7 seconds. Then the spike returned, but wrong. Electrical activity without mechanical response. Beck's triad screaming across the screen, muffled heart sounds, elevated jugular venous pressure, hypertension dropping like a stone. Cardiac tamponade. The pericardium filling with blood, squeezing the colonel's heart until it couldn't beat. Minutes from death. Maybe less. Rachel Torres moved through the service corridor of Mercy General without hesitation, the borrowed credentials still working on the magnetic lock. 0201 hours. The ICU was silent as a tomb. Empty. Every surgical station vacant. Every nurse reassigned. 12 doctors, the entire rotation, every attending and resident with surgical privileges, had been ordered to stand down. Dr. Sterling's voice still echoed through the hospital network from 6 hours earlier, non-viable. Board review. Career consequences for anyone who intervened. The room smelled of antiseptic and the copper-sweet tang of blood pooling where it shouldn't be. Rachel's hands didn't shake as she pulled on sterile gloves. 3 years trying to forget that smell. 3 years pretending those hands belonged to someone else. The monitors beeped their urgent rhythm, 92 to 87 to 79. Blood pressure collapsing. Oxygen saturation dropping like a plummeting elevator. She prepped the pericardiocentesis kit with movements that came from muscle memory deeper than thought. The needle. The 60-milliliter syringe. The 18-gauge angiocath. Everything where it should be. Her breathing synchronized with the ventilator's hiss, in, hold, out. The same rhythm she'd learned in a field hospital tent outside Tikrit with mortars walking across the compound like angry gods. The colonel lay unconscious, his forearm turned upward. Her name was tattooed there, Rachel, in letters he couldn't recognize because his shattered memory held no image of the woman standing over him now. The name was from 3 years ago. From the night she'd carried him 2.1 kilometers through enemy fire while his blood soaked through her uniform and his consciousness flickered like a failing light bulb. He'd whispered her name then. Now he didn't even know her. She palpated the 4th and 5th intercostal spaces, feeling the anatomy beneath her fingertips like reading Braille. Everything lived in her hands, the exact angle, the depth, the point where the needle would pierce the membrane surrounding his heart. She'd done this in sandstorms with tracer fire overhead. She could do this in silence. The needle advanced. Slow. Measured. The characteristic give as it penetrated the pericardium, that subtle pop that only someone trained under fire would recognize as anything but imagination. Dark blood filled the syringe immediately. 60 milliliters. 80, the monitors responded like a patient waking up. Heart rate stabilized. Blood pressure climbing. 120 over 72. Then 128 over 76. Her breathing never changed. Her hands remained steady as surgical steel. 120 milliliters of accumulated fluid. That was the margin between life and death. The width of a syringe plunger. She secured the catheter, flushed the line with normal saline, and taped it down with the same precision she'd used for field dressings. The colonel's vitals normalized at 0204 hours. For minutes. That was all it had taken to bring someone back from the edge of the void. By 0430, when the night shift ended, his rhythm was sinus and stable. Oxygen saturation 98% on modest supplemental flow. Blood pressure holding at 134 over 81. She stood beside the bed in street clothes, no badge, no credential, no authority. Just a woman in jeans and a faded SEAL team shirt, watching a man breathe who shouldn't have been breathing at all. Dr. Sterling arrived at 0615 to find the colonel alive. The monitors displaying the vitals of someone who'd been rescued, not abandoned. For 3.2 seconds, the color drained from his face. Then it came back, darker. Flooded with rage. His phone was in his hand before he left the ICU. Patricia Chen answered on the first ring. She was always ready. Terminate her. Now. Not a request. A command wrapped in controlled fury. The security footage would show an authorized entry. The procedures would show practicing medicine without a license. Everything documented. Everything damning. everything constructed to obliterate her defense before she could even speak. By 0700, he'd called 3 board members: Kozlowski, Williams, Henderson. Men he'd golfed with for 14 years at the Bayou Club. Men who owed him favors. Men who understood that a temp nurse performing unauthorized surgery threatened everyone in the executive suite. By 0800, hospital legal counsel was drafting the emergency complaint. By 0900, the state nursing board had received documentation detailing false morphine entries, unauthorized procedures, practicing medicine without licensure, criminal trespass, and intentional interference with physician treatment plans. Security arrived at 1,200 hours. 2 officers, neutral expressions, professional courtesy that felt like amputation. Rachel signed the termination papers with shaking hands, not from fear, but from the knowledge that she couldn't defend herself without unraveling the life she'd spent 3 years constructing. 1 signature and it was over. 1 pen stroke and the anonymous life collapsed. She rode down in the elevator past the lobby where she'd entered every day for 6 months. Past the cafeteria where she'd eaten lunch alone. Past the administrative wing where Dr. Sterling sat behind an oak desk, watching security footage on his laptop, feeling invincible. That evening, her 12-year-old son Marcus found her at the kitchen table of their small apartment on Brazoria Street. The termination letter lay in front of her, and her worn combat boots sat beside the papers, the one she'd pulled from her locker, unable to leave them behind. Tears were falling onto the pages, but her jaw was clenched so tight that speaking felt impossible. Mom. His voice was small. Uncertain. Why are you home early? Rachel looked at her son, at the boy who knew nothing about the mortars, the screaming, the way blood wouldn't wash off for weeks no matter how hard you scrubbed. The boy who thought his mother was just a nurse at a hospital. She had no answer that didn't unravel everything. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Outside, rain began to hammer against the windows. Not gently. Not soft. Aggressive. Demanding. The kind of rain that made the world outside feel like drowning. Security escorts Rachel through the main lobby at precisely noon, her badge already revoked from the system, fluorescent lights casting everything in pale institutional white. The termination papers tremble in her hands, not from fear, but from the effort of keeping them steady, from the discipline of 12 years of command refusing to surface. She signs each page with mechanical precision, the pen pressing into paper like she's marking ordnance inventories instead of surrendering her livelihood. The security officer, the same one who checked her ID every morning for 3 months, won't meet her eyes. I'm sorry, he says quietly. Rachel nods once. She doesn't apologize back. Apologies are for people who did something wrong. By 1:38 p.m., Dr. Sterling sits in his private office with the door locked, making calls. First to the temp agency, his voice pitched as concerned authority, explaining that Rachel had been found accessing patient records without authorization, that her medical knowledge seemed suspicious for someone without credentials, that perhaps they should review their vetting process before she harms someone else. The temp agency manager, a woman named Patricia Chen who has known Sterling for 6 years, makes a note. Then a second call, this one to the state nursing board, his voice carrying the weight of professional obligation. I'm reporting a concerning pattern of medication administration discrepancies, he says, and the words sound almost sincere because Sterling has spent a lifetime learning to sound sincere. He references dates he hasn't checked. He mentions specific drug dosages he's fabricating in real time. A complaint form is filed. Sterling's assistant, working late, watches him alter pharmacy dispensary records on his personal laptop, inserting Rachel's signature into medication logs from dates when she wasn't even working, timestamps backdated with the casual confidence of a man who has never believed consequences apply to him. Rachel arrives at her apartment at 2:34 p.m., the rain having stopped but the world still glistening with that particular Houston humidity that makes everything feel damp and suffocating. Marcus sits at the kitchen table with his backpack open, homework spread across the surface like evidence. He's 12, with her sharp cheekbones and his father's curly hair, and when he looks up, something in his face shifts. He knows. 12-year-olds always know. Why are you home? His voice carries no inflection, a survival skill inherited from his mother, that ability to ask difficult questions without emotion. Rachel sets the termination letter on the counter, and for a moment the apartment holds only the sound of the refrigerator humming, that low mechanical comfort that fills empty spaces. The hospital made some changes, she says. Her voice is level. Reasonable. The voice of someone explaining a schedule shift, not a career collapse. To the staffing? Marcus asks. He's learned not to ask direct questions about her work, learned years ago that his mother's answers come in narrow channels, that some details stay cordoned off. To my position, she says. Marcus watches her for 3 long seconds, and in that moment Rachel understands that her son is no longer a child who accepts maternal explanations. He is developing the capacity to recognize evasion. Did you get fired? He asks. The word fired sits in the kitchen like shrapnel. Rachel doesn't flinch. She pulls out a chair and sits across from him, and the movement is deliberate, formal, the kind of thing a commanding officer does when about to deliver news to her unit. Yes, she says. Was it because of the soldier? Rachel's breath catches, not visibly, but internally, a hitch in the machinery. What do you mean? Marcus looks at his homework, then back at her. You said that man was special. The one they brought in from overseas. You said he was important. Rachel's hands rest on the table, calloused and steady. He was a patient. All patients are important. But you did something for him, Marcus says. Something that made Dr. Sterling angry. Rachel realizes, in that moment, that children who grow up watching their mothers hide are exceptionally good at reading the gaps in stories. That silence itself becomes a confession. Yes, she says finally. I helped a patient when others wouldn't. Marcus nods, accepting this as much truth as his mother is willing to offer, and returns to his homework. Rachel remains seated, watching raindrops track down the window, each one taking its own path toward some distant ground she cannot see. 3 days later, in the emergency department of Mercy General, where Rachel has begun volunteering unofficially, pushing supplies in the early mornings before the shifts change, making herself useful in ways that require no credentials, a man in his mid-30s arrives through the ambulance bay complaining of severe abdominal pain. His name is Karim Hassan. His belly is rigid. His lips are pale. Acute appendicitis, the attending physician says, and moves to order CT imaging. But Karim has seen Rachel moving through the supply station, and he stops mid-procedure, his hand reaching out, his eyes widening with something that moves beyond recognition into something ancient and religious. He says her name in Dari-accented English, Senior Chief. And then he drops to his knees on the emergency room floor, ignoring the pain in his abdomen, ignoring hospital protocol, ignoring everything except the moment of seeing her again. His voice cracks when he speaks, "You saved my brother in Tikrit." The extraction. The mortars. Colleagues stare. The attending physician freezes mid-notation. Rachel, still in volunteer scrubs that carry no authority and no protection, meets his gaze without blinking. Your brother, she says quietly. Not a question. A confirmation. Karim nods, tears streaming down his face now, and behind him, in the waiting room beyond the glass partition, Marcus has arrived from school, Marcus who volunteered to be the hospital's student helper, who brings donation forms his mother never fills out, who has been watching his mother from a distance for 3 days, and he sees what is happening. He sees Karim Hassan on his knees. He sees his mother's face. And something inside him aligns like a soldier coming to attention. Marcus walks into that emergency room with the measured stride of someone who has spent his entire childhood learning military bearing by osmosis, and he plants himself beside his mother with the precision of a sentry-taking position. My mother is Senior Chief Petty Officer Rachel Torres, he says. The words emerge clean and declarative, each one falling like a salute. The attending physician blinks. Another nurse looks up. Rachel's eyes close for half a second, not from shame, not from fear, but from the weight of 12 years of invisibility shattering in a single moment, spoken by her own child into a hospital full of witnesses. Kareem reaches up and grabs Rachel's hand, pressing his forehead against it. Mercer 6 saved my life, he whispers, using the call sign nobody in Houston should know, the identifier from a dust-choked street in a city 5,000 miles away. Rachel helps him to his feet. Your brother, she asks. Appendicitis. Kareem's voice steadies slightly. He's in ICU. 3 days. They say maybe surgery, maybe. He can't finish. Rachel's hand squeezes his once, then releases. Get him to surgery now, she tells the attending physician, who is still standing motionless. The physician moves. By evening, the door to Mercy General's lobby bursts open and a naval officer in dress blue steps through, not a staff member, not a consultant, but a commander whose bearing moves people out of his path like water around a stone. His voice carries the particular authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed, and it fills the entire waiting room. I am Commander Stone. I am looking for Senior Chief Petty Officer Rachel Torres. The room goes absolutely still. Even the overhead intercom seems to hold its breath. Senior Chief Torres holds 2 Navy crosses, a silver star, and 4 purple hearts for evacuating 17 wounded personnel under sustained small arms fire and mortar attack in Tikrit, Iraq, in 2019. She was medically retired after catastrophic injuries and has been living in this city for 4 years without identifying herself to anyone. He pauses. I need to know if she's here. All eyes turn toward Rachel, who stands in a volunteer scrub top in the corner near the coffee station, and the transformation happens like a light switch illuminating. She steps forward and salutes, not with trembling hands, but with the automatic precision of muscle memory, fist to chest, naval tradition. Sir, she says. Commander Stone salutes back. Your colonel is upstairs. Memory starting to return. He's been asking for the woman with the boots. That was you, wasn't it? Rachel nods. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. The silence in the waiting room has become profound, the kind of silence that happens when the gap between what people believed and what is true becomes too wide to ignore. Dr. Sterling's phone rings at 7:22 p.m. It's board member Kozlowski, and his voice is the sound of a man watching his foundation crumble. Sterling, what the hell is happening? My attorney just called. Federal agents. They're asking about our golf conversations. Our conversation about that temp nurse. Sterling's voice remains steady. I'm sure I don't know what you're referring to. Kozlowski hangs up without responding. 30 seconds later, Sterling's office receives a notification from the hospital's IT department. His computer is being seized for a federal audit. His personal tablet follows. His assistant, looking pale, informs him that investigators have cross-referenced his login credentials with the falsified medication logs. The timestamps show he accessed pharmacy records to create false entries, his digital fingerprints embedded in every one. The temp agency receives formal notification from the Defense Department Office of Inspector General threatening legal action for blacklisting a decorated service member. The State Nursing Board, upon reviewing the complaint paperwork more carefully, notices the inconsistencies, medication names spelled incorrectly in ways no experienced nurse would misspell them, dosages that don't match standard protocols, timestamps that don't align with pharmacy dispensing records. By 8:19 p.m., General Victoria Ramos, 2 stars on her shoulder, authority that moves through institutional systems like a blade through water, arrives in the hospital's main conference room with 3 Defense Department investigators and a sealed federal warrant. Dr. Sterling is called from his office. The board members are present. Reporters have been notified through channels that something is about to occur. General Ramos sits at the head of the table with Rachel's name in front of her on a folder, and when Sterling enters, his face goes the color of hospital walls, bloodless, institutional, empty. Dr. Sterling, Ramos says quietly, you willfully denied necessary medical care to a decorated combat veteran. You falsified medical records. You filed fraudulent complaints against a Navy Cross recipient. You attempted to destroy the reputation of a woman you considered a threat to your financial scheme. Sterling begins to speak. Your privileges at Mercy General are revoked, effective immediately. You are also being referred to federal authorities for prosecution under the False Claims Act. The camera flashes happen in the hallway outside. The crowd of staff members parts as Sterling is escorted out by security officers, the same ones who walked Rachel out 3 days prior. His face is grey. His hands shake. His wife's voice can be heard on his phone. "Richard, the attorney says we need to sell the house." Board member Kozlowski calls a press conference at 9:15 p.m. to announce his resignation, effective immediately. The State Nursing Board withdraws all complaints against Rachel. Sterling Medical Solutions is revealed as a shell company, $340,000 in fraudulent consulting fees across 47 military patients over 18 months. The network that Sterling believed was unshakable disintegrates in real time, each connection he thought was solid proving to be as fragile as his own judgment. 6 months later, Rachel stands in front of Mercy General's new military trauma and PTSD support program, wearing her dress uniform with medals gleaming. The 2 Navy crosses sit above her silver star, which sits above for Purple Heart ribbons, each one representing something she doesn't talk about and doesn't need to. Colonel James Hassan stands beside her in his own dress uniform, his right arm visible, the tattoo clear now. "Rachel, Tikrit 2019, Mercer 6 saved my life." His hand is steady. His mind is clear. The cognitive therapy worked. The memories came back. Marcus stands on his mother's other side, holding ceremonial scissors with his own precise, military bearing. General Ramos presents the program's first official challenge coin. Rachel and the colonel cut the ribbon together. Inside the facility, on the office wall, a shadow box displays her worn combat boots, Dana Tachyon boots, the leather creased and weathered, Tikrit dust still visible in the treads, mounted above a plaque reading, Senior Chief Petty Officer Rachel Torres. When 12 said no, 1 said yes. The first waiting room is already full, 17 veterans, the exact number she evacuated from that street in Tikrit 5 years ago. Kareem Hassan works as the program's cultural liaison. Commander Stone volunteers as medical advisor. Dr. Henderson, one of the 12 surgeons who initially refused treatment, now works in the program 3 days a week after learning the truth about what Sterling was. In a strip mall for miles away, in a folding table wedged between a tax preparation service and a vape shop, Dr. Richard Sterling sits in a polo shirt embroidered with Premier Supplemental Insurance, his phone showing 17 missed calls from his attorney, his future measured now in insurance commissions and federal trial dates instead of the 7-figure consulting fees that evaporated when his network collapsed. The final shot at the ribbon-cutting ceremony shows Rachel and Colonel Hassan standing together, dress uniforms pressed and gleaming, medals catching the morning light, not as victim and savior, but as 2 soldiers who kept each other alive long enough to matter. Marcus stands between them, and his posture is perfect. General Ramos salutes Rachel. Rachel salutes back without trembling, without hesitation, without apology. The shadow box behind them catches the light one more time, worn boots, dried mud, and beneath them the words that matter more than any headline ever will: not all heroes wear capes. Some wear scrubs. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true strength, share your story in the comments. If you know someone who's hiding their real story, remind them that 12 people saying no doesn't erase the 1 person who said yes. Subscribe for more stories of quiet strength, of heroes nobody sees until the moment they have to. Like this video, and hit the notification bell so you never miss the moment when someone finally steps into the light.